Hi, I'm Aki and welcome to another episode of the Advanced Building Tutorials series. On this episode, we're going to focus on tips and tricks to improve your buildings. We're going to start with mixes. And before I get publicly hanged, let me say that I am going to teach you how to do gradients after this, and I am going to talk about the problems with mixes. But for now, let me teach you how to actually do them. Say we have this street right here. We could have replaced all of the emerald blocks for gray concrete powder, and that's our street. But what if we wanted to give it a little bit more detail? We could add cyan terracotta and create a mix. And now we have a street with more detail. You can also choose the amount of each block that's going to be thrown in the mix by adding percentages. Say 20% of concrete powder and 80% of cyan terracotta. There's actually a better way to detail a road. If we look at this random street in Google Maps, you'll see that the road is actually not a uniform color, but rather it has darker areas because it has skid marks, darker areas because of the exhaust fumes, etc. So how can we translate those details into our Minecraft road? We're going to set up a gmask for emerald block, and we're going to draw an orange wool line. And we're going to repeat the same process, but increasing the line's radius. It's 0 by default, but you can actually increase that value to get thicker lines. So we're going to keep adding colors and increasing the radius. After we've done a few, we're going to select the whole thing and start replacing blocks. Remember, we want the road to be a light gray color and for it to get darker as we approach the orange line. We're going to turn the gmask off. We're going to replace the orange wool with pure gray concrete powder. And then as we expand outwards, start introducing more and more cyan terracotta. The types of block you use and the percentages you use, that's completely up to you. You can even add more wool layers and make the transition from darker to lighter over a wider area, or you can even texture it using a brush or doing it manually. Usually doing it manually gives us better results, but well, it's more time consuming. So this is an easy way of doing it. And this is also not limited to paved roads. You can use this while creating paths or even on buildings if one side of the building is more eroded or hasn't been painted in a while. And finally, our road is done. You can see it creates this effect where that line we made looks darker, so it simulates frequent use. Right, so now we have this path right here. I've made this path using a mix, and this mix is maybe useful for a small path or a street, but there's something way better we can do with this. Say you wanted to make a parking lot or maybe an empty lot. Gradients come in real handy for these situations. In this example, you can see how we transition from a lighter gray to a darker gray. It's obviously better if you do it manually, but in the advanced world edit episode, I'm going to show you a quick way of generating these. This is my gradient line right here. You can make your own with whatever blocks you like and with as many blocks as you like. You can use a web page like this one called Hue Blocks, where you can select the amount of blocks you want in your gradient chain, and that will generate your gradient line. Now you might have noticed some blocks here stand out, specifically blocks that have a frame around them, and there are a couple of things to keep in mind here. The first thing is that you don't actually need to use every single block that's on here for your gradient. This is to help you visualize it, and you can pick the ones you like. Some blocks here stand out. Keep that in mind while making your gradient. You don't want a smooth transition ruined by blocks that suddenly pop out, so choose wisely. And this ties in perfectly with the problem with mixes. A lot of builders hate mixes, and that's because they're overused and sometimes used incorrectly. When you're making a mix, the blocks are placed randomly, not in a gradient-like order. So these blocks that stand out are now going to be scattered all around that surface, and this becomes exceptionally horrid when you start creating mixes with colors that contrast each other. So if you're making a mix, be careful and don't use blocks that stand out and don't use blocks that are different colors. Now let's go over to texturing walls. Say we have this wall right here where I've used a white concrete powder, and a wool mix. And using simple world edit, no hand texturing, we can actually make this look way better. You can do it manually or the quick way. So we're gonna select the bottom row. I didn't make a gradient chain line, but you can clearly see the white concrete is the darkest block, then the white concrete powder is a little lighter, and then we have the white wool. And for this wall, I'm going to go from darkest color to lightest color. So we're going to replace the first line with pure white concrete. Then we're going to shift the selection upward and do the same thing again. Now we'll move it up by one block, and now we're going to start transitioning from white concrete to white concrete powder. We're going to do this by slowly decreasing the percentage of white concrete and increasing the percentage of white concrete powder as we shift the region upwards. And now we're going to have 2 lines of pure white concrete powder and repeat the same process to transition from white concrete powder to white wool. Now obviously you can play around with the percentages here. You don't have to make the transition 3 blocks. Your gradient doesn't have to also consist of 3 different blocks. Let's go check out some examples. Here we are in Saldias, a warehouse and depot area, and the wall here starts out as bricks and slowly transitions to a brownish color because it's been decolored by the sun. Same thing with these concrete columns. They start out as a darker color as they're exposed to humidity from the ground. Obviously, this is going to depend on how the build looks on street view. It doesn't always go from dark color to lighter color. Here we are in San Telmo, build made by Juansi, and we can see how he textured the lanes right here, specifically this one that has been darkened by the constant stream of turning vehicles. Going back to our gradient and parking lots, if we go to Google Maps for this parking lot and ignoring these donut marks, you can see that we have lighter and darker spots. We can also apply the same logic to an empty lot. We have this rectangular area here. Now, making these details is obviously very time consuming, but it will greatly increase the quality of your build. I'm here on the BTE UK server and I wanted to show you guys this building right here because it shows you don't have to use a mix for everything. You don't have to use a gradient for everything. Sometimes it's okay to just use a single block. This building has so many details on it that using bone block as its base wall color actually works. Obviously there are different color lines like this calcite line right here, but the main matrix of the building is just bone block. So it's okay to sometimes use a single block too. Now we're going to take a look at the fast command. Now if you have fast async world edit on your server, fast async world edit comes with fast activated by default, and also the changes are instantaneous. So we have this line right here, and I wanted to make a line out of stone buttons. It says 8 blocks have been changed, but no changes have been made. This is because we can't place floating buttons. If you've played Minecraft enough, you'd know that if you break that block, that's gonna update every block around it. So it's gonna check the status for the button. And since we broke the block, the button is gonna be floating, and the button can't be floating, so it's gonna break. Fast allows us to place what we call illegal blocks. That includes floating buttons, floating levers, floating torches, the bottom half or the top half of a 2-block tall flower, the bottom or the top half of any door, etc. So what we do is we activate fast mode. Now we place our stone button line and nothing's changed. That's because fast mode places the buttons, but it requires you to reload those chunks. There are 2 ways of doing this. You could either go far away and then come back, or rejoin the server. So while we're at it, we'll also select the bottom half of this door and stack it 3 times upwards. We log off and then back on. And now we can actually see all the changes we've made. If we actually break one of these, everything is going to break, because as we break one, the one next to it gets updated, so that one breaks, and after that, the next one gets updated, because the one next to it broke. So it's a chain reaction that ends up breaking everything. So while using fast, keep in mind that if you place an illegal block, and then you're working around that illegal block, whether it is just placing blocks or doing world edit operations, that you may accidentally break those illegal blocks you've placed. So if we actually want to place stone here, we have to do it with fast mode activated. Another tip that can seem kind of dumb, but it actually happens, is once you've used fast, remember to deactivate it, because sometimes you do an operation with fast mode activated, then keep building for like 15 minutes, and then you want to do another world edit operation, and you run the command, and nothing happens, and you start to freak out because you're running commands and nothing's happening, and then you remember 15 minutes ago you used fast and forgot to deactivate it. Now we're going to move on to building geometry. Say we're working on a whole city block. How would we go about making the outlines for this building right here? We would normally do tpll to this corner, this corner, this corner, and this corner, and then connect up all the dots, just like we did in the beginner tutorials. There's a better way of doing this actually, and that's treating every straight line as the same line, regardless of how many buildings it goes through. And we're gonna do tpll, and we're gonna connect it from start to finish. Most city blocks will have all the buildings that look over to the street on a single line. So we're going to tpll to where that line starts. Well, it's a little outside my project, but I'll mark it down anyways. And we'll go all the way to this corner right here. and connect these 2 points. So instead of making outlines for each individual building, we treat the whole city block as a single unit. Going back to our original building, we see that this straight line continues all the way up to this institution looking building where it curves slightly. So we're going to treat it as a single line and tpll here. And tpll here. Uh-oh, but we have a problem. We tpll to the front of the building and it doesn't match up with the line we've made earlier. What's happening here? If we were to outline each building individually, yes, all of them would be aligned, but the jump that line makes, to be more precise, the amount of blocks between each jump the line makes, because we're building at an angle here, the amount of blocks between each jump is going to depend on how wide each building is. tpll teleports you to the exact coordinates, and the smallest unit we have to work with in Minecraft is a meter. So in order to preserve the visual geometry of the build, it's not that big of a deal if we move a corner by 1 or 2 blocks. What you can't do is grab this master line here and move it so your building ends up straight. We also have laid back buildings, like this one right here. And there are 2 ways of doing it. Either you end the master line for this front here, or I could continue it all the way to the street corner, then tpll here, and delete what's in between. Or it actually depends, because this looks like it has a small front garden, and I didn't go into street view, but it probably has a fence, or a wall, or something to separate that front garden from the sidewalk. And that division line is following the master line. So it may actually be useful, even though the building is laid back, it may actually be useful to have that line there. That's it for the universal tips. Now we're going to move on to something that's only available in the newer versions. So we're here in Monaco on the BTE France server, and before we move on to the next tip, I'm going to talk about fast async world edit and how you don't need to use /fast if you have this. So if I try to stack the bottom half of this door up, just like we did before on 1.12, it actually does the operation without anything breaking, and we can actually see the changes in real time. Okay, moving on to our final tip/tool. Let's go over and check out this window. You'll see that we have the bottom half of an iron door, banners that are placed against each other. These are things you can do using the fast command or normal operations if you have fast async world edit, but what we're interested in here is using walls that would normally connect as the window frame. We're gonna need the debug stick for that. If you have give permissions on the server, you can use /give, your name, and then the debug stick. Most servers don't have give permissions, so there's probably a custom command to get the debug stick. This allows us to change a block's properties. We can select a property using left click on a block, and once we arrive at the property that we want to change, we can change that property's state with right click.
Hi, this is Futuraki, and I've realized I never really told my story, how I improved my building skills. Of course, to get better at anything, one has to practice. But another thing that really helps is to copy what others are doing. Say you're building something, and it has similar types of windows, or doors, or roof style as another building by another builder that you really liked. A really good way of learning how to make better windows or better doors or better roofs is to copy them from that design you liked and apply them to the current building that you're making. That way, you start to mix bits and pieces from different builds you like, taking inspiration from other builders, and finding your own building style along the way. I literally had a bunch of buildings planned, and I said to myself, okay, I'm going to use a different style for each building in this area. That way, I tested out different styles and also tried a few things of my own. And after I finished that area, I saw a massive improvement in my building skills.
We can see some uses for it right here, where it's used to alter a fence, making it connect to every single side, and it's used for this lamppost. The debug stick is really useful in the newer versions. Sadly, it's not available for 1.12. But anyways, that's gonna be it for this episode. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!